Hi, and welcome to my office. Today I'm going to talk about the big mystery that people struggle with, the exposure. How to set your exposure correct, if it's video or photography by a drone or a regular camera or video camera, doesn't matter. It's the same basic rules that goes for all of them. And there's a little shape like this. That contains the magic of the triangle of exposure.
The three main components in exposure are sensitivity of the film or the sensor, light, the amount of light that hits the film or sensor, exposure time, the time you let light expose to the film or sensor. I have chosen to use DJI Mavic 2 Pro as a reference for explaining. So all the values are based on this drone. Let's talk about the first triangle, sensitivity. The sensitivity are described as ISO. The higher number, the higher sensitivity. Digital cameras has no grain, only pixels. Grain in the old-fashioned films was getting bigger and bigger the higher the ISO went. On a digital sensor, the pixels always stay the same size, but you will get noise in the images, especially in the darker parts. On the Mavic 2 Pro, this starts getting visible around ISO 600 to 800, and getting worse the higher the ISO are. The sensitivity on the Mavic 2 Pro can be set to values between ISO 100 and ISO 12,800, depending on which mode you're shooting in. The next triangle are the amount of light coming through the lens to the sensor. Based on focal length of the lens, sensor size, and the opening the iris in the lens has, the F values are defined in values like this one. As you can see, the lowest number has the widest opening and the highest number the narrowest opening. Some cameras like the one on the Mavic Pro, the old one, and Phantom 3 series has fixed apertures, and then we need other ways to control the amount of light that comes in through the lens, like ND filters. Yeah, even cats know how to adjust the aperture. The aperture on the Mavic 2 Pro goes from f2.8 to f11. And now to the most difficult thing to explain, exposure time, or shutter speed as somebody say. The exposure time are the time you let the light into the sensor, and the values are given in seconds of a fraction of a second, like 1 second, 1/60 part of a second, 1/30 part of a second, and so on. The terms shutter speed are very misleading because we are not talking about speed or motion at all. Speed are described as miles per hour, kilometers per hour, meter per second, and feet per second, and so on. The reason the term shutter speed was used is simply back in the days you had a rotating plate shutter with 180 degrees opening, and the speed of the rotation set the time of the light hitting the film. You don't say your car runs 4 seconds per hour or 10 feet per mile, unless you own a Prius. So that is why I try to use the term exposure time to describe the time you expose light to the sensor. Therefore, I use the symbol for time in the illustrations. Mavic 2 Pro can use exposure times, the shortest 1/8,000 fraction of a second, up to 8 seconds. So these three things make exposure together, and they all interact with each other, and we have a description of value of under and overexposure too. Exposure values are given in negative numbers for underexposure and in positive values for overexposure.
Oh, you're probably bored now by all this theoretical stuff, and Wouldn't it be much more interesting to see this in real life and do some flying and show it in the app, on the DJI app, how it functions?
The home point has been updated. Please check it on the map.
Okay, I'm back now, and we are going to explore the elements to control exposure that are found in the DJI app. By the way, here's a result of the horizontal panel I shot during the flight. The component of exposure settings are shown in the gray bar almost in the middle on the top. And when you click on the slider icon underneath the red record button at the right, you get into the camera setting as shown here. The ISO setting is shown as you can see here, and you can adjust it by the slider and the camera controller. Aperture settings can also be adjusted on cameras that has adjustable aperture, like the Mavic 2 Pro. The exposure time, or should we call it shutter time, shown here, and will also be possible to adjust by sliding in the camera control. Exposure value, or EV, you see the plus and minus signs. Personally, I prefer when I'm shooting to use at least minus 0.3 to make sure that I don't overexposure the highlights. Most of the DJI radios, the Phantom 3, the Phantom 4, the Mavics, you have a controller wheel on the right side in front that you can use to adjust exposure settings. In some radios, you can push that wheel to choose which setting you adjust, or when you're running in auto, you can adjust the EV settings. Then something will change in your settings, ISO, shutter speed, or aperture, to make the sum you adjust it to. In the next episode, I will tell you what filter to use when, why you need it, and how you use it. Please stay tuned to the Drone Owners Network live show, and I'll be back.